That's pretty good for us, isn't it? We got Colin, we got Clee, and we got you. So we're doing pretty good. We appreciate Clee coming up this morning. Glad to have you. Glad that everybody is here today. You know, when we're in a small congregation like this, everybody's got a role to play, everybody's got to participate, and it takes us all to make it work. Sometimes we may not, I know I don't appreciate everyone as much as I need to. I don't express that. But it does. It takes all of us, whether that's making the deposit or keeping the lights on so we can have heat back here in the back room, which we now have, or whether that is doing communion, preparation of the communion every week, or doing the directory. Have we ever had a directory here at Headley? I don't remember one. And Joella is working on a directory. We appreciate that. Whether that is leading prayers, helping at the table, or making sure that we have people.
Hey, Will.
Come on in. Y'all come on in. We're glad that y'all are with us today.
Got the whole Montgomery family.
So now we got more song leaders, Black. We're really good. It does. It takes us all. And for the lights, and taking care of the yard, all those things are little things that I may not always say appreciation, but we do appreciate them. Sometimes it may be getting people to church, and we appreciate when that happens too, or making a meal. Those are good things. It may be providing a little wisdom, a little love. That's always makes our congregation better. Those are things that make us better. But I'm sure y'all are expecting he's got something else here, and that's true, is we got another job, another responsibility. This isn't a hard job, but we need somebody to do it. It's not going to take a lot of time, but it is a responsibility. It's something that one person can do, or several people, or we can all do it together. But we are going to need somebody to remind Donnie to duck. We're glad that Donnie, we're glad
Make your donations so I can pay attention.
We're teasing Donnie, as he did cut his head on a sign last week. And we're glad that he's better today. We're sorry it happened. We're glad it's better. But today, when we're leaving, remind Donnie to duck today.
We'll get Jace to kick him in the shin when he gets to it. Bends over the shin, he'll miss the sign.
All right.
Remember that.
Okay. All right. We've been studying John, and last week we looked at the Jesus and the Samaritan woman, and obviously there's a lot in there, a lot more than we can go through. But we see how John is giving us a kind of a commentary on John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And we see that John makes it clear that Jesus wants to include everyone, even Samaritan women who are not very popular, might even be considered enemies, or not somebody you don't like. And he is trying to teach us that we want to make sure that the good news of God's kingdom goes to everyone. And we're going to look at that again today as he goes and he talks to a disabled person in Jerusalem. But also, when we're looking at Jesus' miracles, whether it's healing the paralytic, or when we get to the blind man, or the rich man's son, it's not just about the miracle. It's about what does that tell us about Jesus. And all the way through John, one of the things that John is trying to do is to teach us who Jesus is. That's a question that the people who are listening to John when he's giving his gospel have to answer. Who is Jesus? And also, that's one of the things that we have to answer. Is today, when we read John, we have to answer, who is Jesus? Who do we believe him to be? Because that's one of the most important questions that we have in John. And last week when he was talking to the Samaritan woman, this wasn't part of what we do. But it tells us, but the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. when we look at that phrase in the Greek, right there at the end, Jesus answers, I am, which is exactly what he said, or what God said to Moses at the burning bush when Moses asked him, who shall I say sent me? And God tells him, you tell him, I am sent me. And here when Jesus says, I am, to this woman at the well, he's telling him who she is, who he is, who Jesus is. And when we look at these passages in John, so often the question is, who is Jesus? And it's telling us more about who he is. Today we're going to be looking in chapter 5. And this is the story that we've all read, but we're going to read it again. 5 through 18 is where we're going to be. But it tells us that Jesus has been in Galilee, up at Cana, and now he has come back to Jerusalem for another Jewish festival. That's one of the things about John, is Jesus comes to Jerusalem many times, recorded. And some of the other Gospels, it only records him coming once. That's not an inconsistency. It just means that during Jesus' ministry here on earth, John chooses to record some things that other people don't. But it does tell us that Jesus is a faithful Jewish man. That he takes care when he's supposed to come to the city, he does. And that's something I think we can learn from him. But we're going to start here in verse 5 of chapter 5. One man was there who had been in an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, do you want to be healed? The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me. Jesus said to him, Get up, take your bed, and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed. But he answered them, The man who healed me, that man said to me, Take up your bed and walk. They asked him, Who is this man who said to you, Take up your bed and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, and there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, My Father is working until now, and I am working. This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And when we look at this passage, this place in Jerusalem where the people would go, it's called Bethsaida, which means house of mercy. We have lots of hospitals these days that have Bethsaida in their name to show that it's a house of mercy. It says there are 5 columns there with lots of people who were sick or invalid or hurt. And this is one of the things is archaeology, they have found this place. A lot of the times something that's said in the Bible we can't find, but this one's there. There's been a lot of archaeology and digging and has found lots of artifacts. They know where this was. And it said there were a lot of people there. And Jesus found this man who was a paralytic for 38 years. And one of the things, I know I've said this before, but Jesus would make a great lawyer because he always asked such good questions. And he asked this man, do you want to be healed? Now I know that we're expecting a shout. Of course I want to be healed. Yes, I want to be healed. We think of blind Bartimaeus on the road to Jericho, and he calls out to Jesus, I want to see. This man doesn't. This man, instead of answering that question, he says, Sir, every time I try to get into this pool, which I believe would heal me, someone gets in there first, and I can't get in there. And I've been here for 38 years. And Jesus heals him. One of the things we see here is what's recorded. I know that I don't want to say too much because I don't know. But the Bible does not record this man as having any faith whatsoever. He doesn't ask to be healed. He doesn't have faith in Jesus, or there's none recorded. And he doesn't say thank you. And then when it's time, the Jews come and confront him, he rats Jesus out when he figures out who healed him. So this guy doesn't come across real well. And I don't know if there's a message in that, but it's certainly there, that he doesn't appear to be grateful, or maybe even want to be healed. And Jesus seeks him out. And then it tells us that after he doesn't know who it is, Jesus goes to the temple to find him. Jesus is seeking him. And when we think about that John 3:16, that the word is for everyone, that Jesus, just as he is seeking this guy, Jesus is seeking us. And I think that's something to remember. Not only are we seeking Jesus, but Jesus is also seeking us. One of the verses in here, it talks about when Jesus goes back to talk to him. It talks about how that Jesus tells him, sin no more, so that nothing else will happen to you. Now, one thing I want to make sure that we see is in John 9, Jesus is talking to his disciples. There's a blind man. And those disciples ask, who sinned that this man is blind? Him or his parents? That there was this connection between sin and blindness. And one of the things when Jesus says to this guy, don't sin so that nothing else worse will happen to you, he's not saying that because you're a sinner, you were struck invalid. Now we know that sometimes if you abuse your body and eat too much for a long period of time, you will develop diabetes. I know that. If you eat too much and are too gluttonous, bad things will happen. But that doesn't mean that God is striking us with some disease because of our sin. What Jesus, I think, is saying is you've been given a gift of life. That when he says get up and walk, it's not just putting one foot in front of the other. It is about having life. That the way to walk is a way to live. And if you go on sinning, you're going to lose that life. You're going to lose the life that you have in God. And that is what is going to happen. It's not going to be a thunderbolt come down and strike you because you sin. It's going to be because you are sinning, because you're not living the life that God has given you to the fullest and within his commands, that you will suffer for it. And so I want to make clear that we don't have that. Because I think that you could read that into this passage, and I think that would be a mistake. But one of the things we do see is we see these religious leaders. Have you looked at what their question was? Why are you walking around with your mat? And the man says to them, the man who healed me told me to walk around or to carry my mat home. Now, this guy has been there for 38 years. These are the Jewish leaders there in Jerusalem. We know that this pool is right below where the temple is. They have to know this guy. Somebody's been taking care of him, at least giving him some alms. And now they see him walking around. And he says, the guy who healed me told me to walk and carry my mat. You think that the answer they're going to give is going to be, or the question they will ask, who healed you? That's the thing that they should ask. But they don't. They say, who told you to walk around on the Sabbath carrying your mat? They missed the opportunity to see God's work here in the world and to celebrate with this man. Here is a man who's been paralyzed for 38 years and he is walking around. What a chance to celebrate God's good gift. Makes me think of Blackie being back with us today. Let's look up and see that he's back with us, and let's celebrate that we have that. Let's don't miss that. Now I know that many times we look at this and we see these religious leaders and we say, oh, those stupid Jews. But we want to think, this is out of Mark, that Jesus says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What we're trying to say is Sabbath is not the problem. That Sabbath, what was commanded in the Old Testament, that when God created the earth, he rested on the seventh day and made it holy. The Sabbath of taking time to dedicate time to God is not the problem. The having a time where we are quiet and can think and can worship God is not the problem. The problem is these guys were looking at a little rule, and what they could see was this guy's breaking the rule, as opposed to seeing the great event of what Christ had done. That they were so concerned with being the behavioral police that they could not see God working in the world. And sometimes I think that we can be the same. Sometimes I think that we look at this and we say, they were looking at the wrong rule, and not as opposed to seeing the greatness of God. Isaiah. God says to Isaiah, God is talking. And he said, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and their eyes heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. And so I think that these religious leaders there were seeing this very thing. They were enacting what Isaiah, or was recorded in Isaiah as God saying, is they could not open their eyes and see. They could not hear the good news of God. All they could see was this rule. All they could see is, this is not the behavior that we're looking for, as opposed to seeing God's work. Okay. You know, earlier, I was teasing Donnie about we got to have somebody to tell him to duck. And I was joking. But I'm seriously, sometimes instead of reminding each other to duck, we need to remind each other to look up so that we can see. To look up, to listen, and to hear. Now, I don't know who this, I said, always says author unknown. I don't know who this is. But the man whispered, God, speak to me, and the meadowlark sang. But the man did not hear. So the man yelled, God, speak to me. And the thunder rolled across the sky. But the man did not listen. The man looked around and said, God, let me see you. And a star shined brightly. But the man did not see. And the man shouted, God, show me a miracle. And a life was born. But the man did not notice. So the man cried out in despair, touch me, God, and let me know you're here. Whereupon God reached down and touched the man. But the man brushed the butterfly away and walked on. And so I think we're sometimes like this man. We don't look up. We don't see. We don't listen. We don't hear. And I got to tell you, sometimes we need to be reminded to look up. And when we think about a hospital, we know that sometimes there's obviously sickness there. There's something wrong. And that's what we see. But instead, we should remind ourselves to open up and remember Blackie being in the hospital and people coming in, hearing he's a song leader, and coming in and singing with him. And that is something that shows God's grace and His presence here with us. Sometimes we listen to the news. And whatever channel you're listening to, it's an echo chamber, teaching you something to be afraid of the war. We know that there could be, in the Ukraine, there could be an invasion this week. We don't know that there will be, but there could be. That is a real risk, and if it happens, lots of people will die. And that is a horrible thing. That when we see this, when we see the pandemic, we know that people are sick and that people have died, and I don't mean to make light of that at all. We all have had loved ones, of friends and relatives that have died as a result of the pandemic. But let's not forget to look up and remember all those who have survived. Let's remember to look up and see that we have nurses, and we have doctors, and we have people working constantly to try to help those people, to keep them alive, maybe even to the point of exhaustion, that we have those people that we want to see. Sometimes we want to look up and hear. And we want to hear the singing. We want to remember those that are part of our love. And it says here that the man said, God touched me. And the butterfly came and he didn't notice. And we think that, when was God touching us? But sometimes we need to look up. Sometimes we need to remember what the touch of a person is. Let's remember what a hug from Mary Ruth is like. It may be a healing hug. That it may be as good as we can ever get. And let's remember that. Let's not forget that when we have that touch of one another, that there is healing in that there is love in that. And we can look up and we can see. We are about to partake of the Lord's Supper. And let's remember that Jesus is here with us. Let's look up and not be so concerned with what is our daily, as Jimmy would tell us, not be so concerned with our daily concerns. But let's look up and remember that Jesus is here with us. Let's remember his death on the cross, and let's remember that he rose from the dead, and let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate Christ rising from the dead. Let's remember to remind one another to look up and see the Lord. As Don told us, today is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Let's remember to remind one another to look up and see that today is the day. Now, today, if you need to look up, if you need to be reminded, if you need prayers, if you need to know that God is with us, if you need to put on put on Christ in baptism, if you would come as we stand and as we sing.